Today's lesson is going to be on weird but true history. I'm taking a slight break from World War One, and I'm going to do a weird but true history lesson. And then I'm going to take the day and kind of gather my thoughts and see what I want to do next. And it is going to be the end of World War One into World War Two. But then I've also had some people ask me about some different types of weird history, or different history. So I'm going to try to do some research on that today. I'm also hoping that my family doesn't walk in. For the first time I'm doing one of these. My kid is up and my husband is here. So if they walk in behind me, I may have to stop and redo. But today is weird but true history. And I do want to make my usual announcement is that this is from my research. These items are true. If you've heard something different associated with this, I'm not saying yours is wrong or mine is wrong. It's just people hear different things, and things are passed down differently from generation to generation. So if I've said something that you do not agree with, just let me know, and we can research it together. All right, so this is Quarantine History 2020, video number 6, Weird but True History. And we'll go through it as quickly as we can. All right, so I've kind of categorized these into customs and weird food facts and clothing and just kind of things like that. So tomatoes were considered poisonous until the 1800s. The reason why is that people had lead in their plates. And so the acid in tomatoes leaking out would cause people to die because the acid in the tomatoes made it very, very much poisonous. So all he knew is that people ate tomatoes and then they died. And so they ended up planting them outside of outhouses because it helped them mask the smell of outhouses. And so they were considered poisonous for hundreds of years, really, until the mid to late 1800s. All right, both tomatoes and potatoes were discovered by explorers in South America. So today we associate tomatoes with Italy and potatoes with Ireland, which in fact neither one of those were native to those lands. Most nobles had vitamin deficiency due to eating only mostly bread and meat. They considered it beneath them to eat peasant food like vegetables. And so actually peasants were much healthier in some aspects because they did eat vegetables because they could not hunt on their owner's land without permission. You couldn't even fish in their ponds without permission, but you could grow vegetables. And so they grew vegetables, and they did not eat a lot of meat. Chickens occasionally, birds, whatever they could grow, raise, and have on their own little farms. But they did eat a lot of vegetables, so they were considered healthier than the nobles. All right, so this section is clothing, hairstyles, and makeup. Blue, dark blue, or purple clothing was considered to be only for the royals or nobles because the indigo used to color clothes was very hard to get and expensive. And so there's a picture of Louis XIV of France, and he's in, as my students call it, he's in his carpet. He's got this very long, elaborate carpet. It looks like grandma's carpet is what it looks like. But I mean, it's enormous and it's long and it's flowing across the floor. And I tell the kids, I'm like, this shows his wealth, and it shows his wealth because it's dark, dark blue. And that's how you showed your wealth, is you showed your wealth in your clothing and in your hairstyles. And so indigo was so hard to get that it was considered only for royals or nobles to color their clothes. Most clothes, we'll get to that in a minute on the color. So clothing was designed to help people wear them frequently. And I could not find a really, really good picture of this. And so I'm going to try to explain it as I go through this. You can imagine in the 1700s, 1800s, 1600s, whatever, it's hard to wash clothes. So you had to kind of have your clothes on in sections. And so like you would have a section like this, like your main top, but your sleeves were actually stitched in. So you could change out your sleeves. Or you could change out your undergarment. It would be easier to change that under your vest. Your main section of clothing, your vest or your skirt, if you're a woman, if your coat and pants, if you were a man, those were not washed as frequently because it was hard to do and also is expensive. I mean, you can't have, a closet full of clothes like you have now. And so the clothes were designed so that sleeves, blouses, and vests could be removed and washed easily. Now, the ruff that like Queen Elizabeth I is wearing here, that was also you could take that off and you could wash it. Um, so they also could be exchanged to look like different dresses. And then clothes were typically were dyed using plants or other organic chemical or organic products. And so the peasants or the normal everyday people, and even the nobles really, wore just kind of neutral colored clothing. You can see here in this picture, Queen Elizabeth is wearing something that is dark blue in color. And that does again denote her wealth and show her wealth because she could afford the massive amount of indigo that it would take to color that. So I thought that was really interesting, though, about the sleeves that they were stitched in so you could exchange your sleeves out and make it a different outfit. All right, Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of French King Louis XV, was known for her elaborate hairstyles, and so the elaborate hairstyles gave rise to the name Pompadour. So the men in the 50s had the Pompadour hair cuts like Elvis, and then the women also were called that, and so that comes from Madame de Pompadour. Queen Elizabeth I used lead-based makeup to create her very white image. It would slowly poison her over her lifetime, making her hair fall out, and it made her skin very, very rough. I don't know another way of saying this. It modeled her skin, and it would look, I guess, like a lizard almost. There are descriptions of her hair skin feeling very lizard-like or snake-like. I'm not going to have that exact description, but it did ruin her skin makeup, how it looked and how it felt. She was also addicted to a new food called sugared candy, and it rotted her teeth out. Sugar had been introduced early 1500s, mid 1500s. They found sugar cane and that it would grow in the southern Americas countries, and so they would grow the sugar cane and have it processed and brought back and as sugar, and so they've discovered to put sugar in chocolate among other things. And so she particularly liked something called sugared violets, and it rotted her teeth out. Um, Before Queen Victoria of England, women didn't get married in white dresses. White was very, very hard to clean, so women would get married in any color available, and actually, red was the most popular choice for most people. Queen Victoria decided she would be married in white. And it had nothing to do with sexual purity. It had to do with the fact that if you wore, much like blue, wearing blue showed you were wealthy. If you wore white, it showed you were very wealthy because you could afford to have the dress cleaned and keep it clean. So after Queen Victoria wore white, all women wanted to wear white also because it showed you were rich enough to keep it clean. It had absolutely nothing to do with sexual purity. It was about keeping the dress clean and pristine. And if you could do that, and if you could wear white to your wedding, then you were wealthy. All right, customs around the world. In ancient times, groomsmen or best men went with the groom to kidnap the bride. They would also help prevent family from taking her back or to prevent other suitors from taking the bride away from the groom. They would also prevent the bride from running away. You know. Also, they would guard the bride, preventing them from switching out the brides. Now, we could go into a whole conversation about why they would want to do that, but we won't do that. It was known to happen, especially between noble families. But also, the family would try to take her back if it wasn't a approved wedding. Bridesmaids, in turn, wore all the same clothes for a couple of reasons to confuse evil spirits. They would also protect the bride, help her get married, and some say wore the same clothes to confuse the bandits. So if there was like warring families after the same bride, and you were trying to marry someone to exact peace, they would all wear the same clothes. So whoever was coming to steal the bride would be confused as to who they would get. Okay. All right. Have you ever heard the term "saved by the bell"? Well, literally, people were saved by the bell. During a pandemic of any type, yellow fever, the plague ish, although they buried, I didn't put that one in here. I'll tell that one next. Um, but during a pandemic, people were buried, sometimes buried alive. And people were so afraid of contracting the disease that they would just grab bodies to bury them. Well, people would report hearing people crying out for help, and then they would open the coffin only to find scratches on the inside of the lid. And we'll talk about that on another post. So, this created a safety coffin. A bell was placed above your grave with a string tied to your finger. And you can see in the picture there, there's like a depiction of what one would have looked like. So that if you woke up in the coffin, you would ring the bell, and there would be people sitting in the graveyard at all times to hear that. This would actually start the Southern custom of people sitting up with the dead for at least 3 days before they were buried. My dad would tell about that they would take turns sitting up in the funeral home all night when someone died. And I'm just like, no, thank you very, very much. Not going to do that. But they also did it when they buried, had the funerals in the people's homes in the South, and I guess everywhere else. But that started in Southern custom. Now, I did forget to put this. The song that we have our precious little children sing, "Ring Around the Rosie," is actually a song about the Black Plague. And I start when we start talking about the Middle Ages and Black Plague, I start out singing to the kids, "Ring around the rosy," and they all start singing it. Well, it's about the Black Plague. So let me break it down to you. Ring around the rosy. The Black Plague, you would have these rose colored like splotches come up on your person. And that's the infection, the bubonic plague. That was the pustules that would come up. All right, so ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. Well, you kept posies, flowers, in your hand or your pockets to stench the smell of death. And so ring around the posy, pockets full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Okay, couldn't remember it there. Ashes, ashes. Well, they burned the bodies. There were so many people that died during the bubonic plague, the Black Death, that they just had to bury. They either buried them in mass graves, or they burned the bodies. And then we all fall down. You die from the Black Plague. So that was especially a nice little song that we tell our children to sing as their children, as their little bitty kids. Going back to the brides, also, I meant to mention this in here and I didn't. The reason why women started carrying bouquets of flowers was because you didn't take a bath very often. It was a lot of cultures thought that it was that you harmed yourself by taking too many baths. And honestly, it was just a situation where you just you couldn't. I mean, you didn't have a nice shower to walk into. It was tough to take a bath. You didn't have a bathtub to soak in. At the most, you might have what they called like a little hip tub where you just kind of sat in it with your knees drawn up to your chest. But you didn't have the capabilities of taking a bath very often. And so you did what you could do, but the women started carrying bouquets of flowers to stench their body odor. All right, Americana. I will admit completely took this from a coworker's page, Jenny Green, and I knew this already. I had just forgot to put this in here. I tell my students this quite frequently. Now, I'm not going to say that anytime you see this today, that this is not used as a racist item. I'm just saying it wasn't considered racist at first. These are called lawn jonkeys or Blackfootmen. And this was a statue that denoted who would help you on the Underground Railroad. One of my favorite things to tell students is that during the American Civil War, um, the African American culture grew exponentially during this time period. And so much of their culture today, the spiritual songs that they sing, the stories that are told, it unfortunately does come from slavery, but there are some good things about it. The songs that they would sing would, not all of them, but a lot of the songs that they would sing would talk about how to get free, how to find areas on the Underground Railroad, because the owners and the masters and the overseers of the plantations did not think anything about hearing them sing. And so they were able to weave in their stories in their songs. Their blankets, their quilts had maps to the Underground Railroad. And I think that is so fascinating about how that they persevered in such a horrible time. This is one of those things where the lawn jockeys denoted whether or not you could swap out a horse. You can't see it here because my video is blocking it. But they could swap out their horses. They could stay overnight, or that there might be someone there that could take you to safeties elsewhere, like Canada. If you did not see their lantern lit up, you didn't stop because it meant that there was people in the area or that their home had been raided earlier that day. So that this was noted as being a stop on the Underground Railroad. So when a lot of people see these, they consider it to be racist, and I get that. I get why that they would. But you have to, like I tell my students, I said, if you walked in here one day and you saw me with this, you know, would you automatically think I was racist? Probably. And I wouldn't blame you for it. But it's always important that we understand the history behind something. I said, now, if I told you this history of this item and you knew me and you knew, that I am not racist, would you, if you saw that, would you think I was racist? And they were like, no, absolutely not. So it is really important to know something. And I really got tickled this year. I had a student tell me she had been out. I forget what she was doing, but she said, I saw something. I took a picture of it and I wanted to show it to you. And it was very far away and it was hard to see. And she said she couldn't get any closer to it, but she zoomed in and it was a lawn jockey someone had. And she said, my mother went, what is that? And I was like, no, Mom, it's Miss Pickle told me about it, and this is what it was about. And they went home and looked it up and saw. And now again, I can't say that that's what that person had it for, but that is the original history of a Blackfootman or a lawn jockey. All right, so going back to the Saved by a Bell, the safety coffin. Sometimes if you saw scratches on the inside of a coffin, but no body there, you were like, well, what happened? This is kind of where the story of the vampire got started. And I can do a whole nother one on Vlad the Impaler, who was the original kind of person for Dracula. But if you opened a coffin and you found scratches on the inside, it did mean that they were buried alive. But where did the body go? Well, unfortunately, bodies were being stolen for medical students for dissection, and not just sometimes for medical students, just for people. which is again where the story of Frankenstein came from. And Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, they dissected human bodies in order to understand how human body worked and how muscles looked and how bone looked. And that's what gave their paintings and sculptures so much realistic tone to it. Okay. All right. So, right now it's just going to be quick facts and just general facts. So, right now it seems during this quarantine, every day is a holiday. But at one time, the church, and that's what we would consider the Catholic Church today, although it was not called the Catholic Church at the time, controlled much of everyday life in towns and villages. And this included the days that the workers got off. They would tell the lords that the peasants needed off days or holy days, and we call them today holidays. All right, so basic terms, raining cats and dogs. Unless it's golden retrievers, I'm not really interested. Kidding. But where does the saying it's raining cats and dogs come from? Well, there's a lot of opinions, but one of the most prominent ones seems to come from about the 1700s. If you can see the picture there, houses were small, low to the ground, and had thatched roofs. Well, dogs and cats could climb up there, and mine is putting his head in my lap for pets. So that's what I'm doing right now. Dogs and cats would get up there to sun themselves or just to get out of the way. And so when it rained, they would slide off. And so it was raining cats and dogs. Speaking of houses, during the Middle Ages and medieval times, something popped up of a threshold. So, why do we call an entryway a threshold? Well, you wanted to keep debris or water out of a house, so a plank or board was nailed at the entryway to hold or keep stuff out of the house, and or a thresh. That's kind of like a old. I think it was a Viking type word or something like that. Anyway, thresh is the English form of whatever word was used during that time. And so we called it a threshold because it held back the debris. All right, so just some last call for weird facts. The last person to be beheaded in France by guillotine was in 1977. Leeches and maggots have been used by doctors for hundreds of years. Maggots eat rotten flesh, and leeches help reduce bruising. And in fact, they still could be used today. During the American Civil War, Northern troops introduced Southern troops to a game that will become known as baseball. A letter was written home by a soldier to his family telling that they had to break up a game because a battle broke out. And it's also said that that's why baseball starts in April, is because that's when the war ended. Before the American Civil War, most nurses were always male. The American Civil War and the Crimean War helped introduce women to the nursing profession. There really was a Florence Nightingale, and she went to the Crimean War, and she helped introduce nursing to European women. During World War One, German and French troops declared a truce on Christmas Eve, and they played football, which is what we call soccer, exchanged gifts, shared food, and sang carols. That is just a few odd facts that I have picked up over the years. I want to do one just about military odd facts because I love that kind of thing. My friend Andrea, she and I have been texting back and forth since I started doing this, and she gave me a couple of really neat tips about the Civil War that I didn't know either. And then she shared some pictures of her. I think it was her great grandfather during World War One that I'm gonna. She said I could share in another video, so I'm gonna do that one day. So I hope you've enjoyed this today. And this is Weird History, Weird but True History, video number 6 in Quarantine 2020.